This isn't speculation. This isn't alternative history. This is documented fact. A courier carried orders that would have changed everything. He never delivered them. The Battle of Waterloo, June 18, 1815. Napoleon's final stand, Wellington's desperate defense, and between them, a message that could have tilted the balance of European history. But this story doesn't start at Waterloo. It starts 3 days earlier with a letter that did arrive and the catastrophic misunderstanding it created. June 15, 1815. Napoleon has escaped from Elba. He's rebuilt his army in 100 days. Now he's crossed into Belgium with 125,000 men. His plan? Destroy the Allied armies before they can unite against him.
Facing him are two armies. The Duke of Wellington commands 68,000 British and Dutch troops. Field Marshal Blücher leads 120,000 Prussians. Separately, Napoleon can defeat them. Together, they'll crush him. Napoleon knows this. His entire strategy depends on keeping them apart. June 16th, Napoleon splits his forces. He sends Marshal Ney with 25,000 men to hold Wellington at Quatre Bras. He personally leads 68,000 against Blücher at Ligny. His plan? Smash the Prussians, then turn on Wellington before they can help each other. The Battle of Ligny becomes the bloodiest single day of the entire Waterloo campaign. Napoleon pounds the Prussian center with artillery, sends wave after wave of infantry. At 7:30 p.m., he commits the Imperial Guard. The Prussian line breaks. Field Marshal Blücher, 72 years old, personally leads a cavalry charge to rally his troops. His horse is shot from under him. He falls. The horse lands on top of him. Prussian cavalry have to rescue him while being trampled by their own retreating forces. Napoleon has won. The Prussians are in full retreat. This is the moment that decides everything. Napoleon needs to pursue, destroy the Prussian army completely, make sure they can't reinforce Wellington. He writes orders for Marshal Grouchy, commanding 33,000 men. Pursue the Prussians, don't let them regroup, don't let them reach Wellington. Grouchy receives the orders at 10 p.m. He pursues northeast, where the Prussians seem to be heading. But here's the problem. Grouchy assumes the Prussians are retreating to their supply bases to the east. Every military manual says that's what you do after a defeat. Protect your supplies, regroup. That's what he's been taught. That's what makes sense. Except Blücher doesn't do what makes sense. Bruised, possibly concussed, definitely in agony, he makes a decision that violates every rule of warfare. He retreats north, toward Wellington, away from his supplies, toward the enemy. His officers think he's insane. You don't retreat toward the enemy. You don't abandon your supply lines. You don't risk everything on a British commander who might not even stand and fight. Blücher doesn't care. I gave Wellington my word, he says. We marched north. June 17th. Grouchy pursues the Prussians eastward, but the Prussians aren't going east. They're going north. The gap between Grouchy and Napoleon's main army grows with every hour, from 10 miles to 15, from 15 to 20. Meanwhile, Wellington has fallen back from Quatre Bras. He's taken position on a ridge near a small village called Waterloo. He studied the ground carefully, a reverse slope that will hide his infantry from French artillery, good fields of fire, a solid position, but he's still outnumbered, and he knows it. June 18th. Dawn breaks over Waterloo. Napoleon surveys Wellington's position. He's confident. Grouchy is somewhere behind the British, pursuing the Prussians. Wellington is isolated. Napoleon has 72,000 men and 246 guns. Wellington has 68,000 and is dug in on a ridge. At breakfast, Napoleon's marshals express concern. Shouldn't they wait for Grouchy? Napoleon dismisses them. Wellington is a bad general. The English are bad troops. This will be over by lunchtime. He orders the attack for 11:30 a.m., giving the ground time to dry after the previous night's rain. But at 10 a.m., Napoleon receives disturbing news. Prussian columns have been spotted to the northeast, moving toward the battlefield. This changes everything. Napoleon immediately writes to Grouchy. A courier gallops off with the message. The letter is explicit. Prussian forces are moving to join Wellington. You must march toward the sound of guns. You must attack the Prussian rear. You must prevent them from reinforcing the British. The fate of France depends on your comprehension of these orders. The courier rides hard. 20 miles separating Grouchy from Napoleon, through mud-soaked roads, past confused infantry units still looking for the Prussians they're supposed to be pursuing. The letter might take 3 hours to arrive, maybe 4. 11:30 a.m. Napoleon can't wait any longer. He orders the attack. Jerome Bonaparte's division assaults Hougoumont, a fortified farm on Wellington's right flank. It's supposed to be a diversion, draw British reserves away from the center. Instead, Hougoumont becomes a death trap. British guards defend the walled farm with murderous efficiency. French forces pour in, trying to take it. More troops, more attacks. What was supposed to be a diversion is consuming an entire division. 1 p.m., Napoleon assembles the Grand Battery. 80 guns lined up wheel to wheel. They open fire on Wellington's center, the biggest artillery barrage of the Napoleonic Wars. The sound can be heard in Brussels, 10 miles away. But Wellington's infantry is behind the ridge, lying down on the reverse slope. Most of the cannonballs sail over their heads or bury themselves in the muddy ground. The Grand Battery, Napoleon's great weapon, is hitting mostly empty air. 1:30 p.m., Count d'Erlon leads 16,000 infantry in 4 massive columns toward Wellington's left center, the largest infantry assault of the day. Drums beating, eagles flying. This is supposed to break Wellington's line. Ney charges again, and again, and again. 12 separate cavalry charges over 2 hours. Cuirassiers, lancers, chasseurs, the pride of French cavalry. They achieved nothing except their own destruction. 10,000 cavalrymen lost for no gain. 3 p.m. Grouchy receives Napoleon's first letter, written at 10 a.m. 5 hours in transit. March toward the sound of guns. Attack the Prussian rear. Grouchy reads it, studies his maps, makes calculations. It's 15 miles to Waterloo, through mud with 33,000 men. It will take us 4 hours minimum. The battle will be over by then. My orders say pursue the Prussians. There are Prussians here at Wavre. I will attack them here. 4 p.m. Grouchy attacks the Prussian rearguard at Wavre. It's a pointless battle. 17,000 Prussians are holding off 33,000 French, while the main Prussian army is at Waterloo, fighting Napoleon. The Prussians don't need to win. They just need to delay Grouchy. Meanwhile, at Waterloo, more Prussian units are arriving. Pirsch's Second Corps, Zieten's I Corps. Wellington's left flank, which was collapsing under French pressure, is being reinforced. The Prussians aren't just arriving, they're attacking, pushing into Napoleon's right flank. Napoleon is fighting on 2 fronts now, Wellington to the west, Blücher to the east. His army is being compressed. The noose is tightening. Where is Grouchy? Where are those 33,000 men who should be attacking the Prussian rear? 6 p.m., the French finally capture La Haye-Sainte, a fortified farm in the center of Wellington's line. For the first time all day, they have a breach in the British position. French artillery is brought up to fire at the British line at close range. This is Wellington's crisis moment. His line is breaking. His reserves are gone. His cavalry is shattered. He needs help, and he needs it now. He sends an aide to find the Prussians. Tell Blücher if he cannot come soon, the day is lost. Prussian General Zieten's First Corps is approaching the battlefield, but they're moving toward the French right, not toward Wellington's crisis. A British liaison officer gallops up. Wellington needs you on his left, now, not in an hour, now. 5:30 p.m. at Wavre. The second courier reaches Grouchy. Napoleon's second letter, written at 2 p.m. The battle is here at Waterloo. March toward the guns. We need you. 3.5 hours in transit. Grouchy reads it, looks at his watch, looks at his maps. It's now 5:30. The battle has been raging for 6 hours. It's 15 miles through mud. Even if we march immediately, we won't arrive until 9 p.m. or later. The battle will be decided by then. His officers beg him, "We can still make a difference. We can attack the Prussian rear. We can relieve pressure on the Emperor." Grouchy shakes his head. "We are engaged here at Wavre. We cannot disengage while in contact with the enemy. We will continue the attack here." 7 p.m. at Waterloo. Napoleon has one card left to play. The Imperial Guard, the most elite infantry in the world. 15,000 veterans who have never been defeated. He orders 8 battalions, 4,000 men, to attack Wellington's center. They march in perfect formation through the smoke and carnage, through their own wounded, through the wreckage of the day's failed attacks, drums beating the pas de charge. Every man knows this is the final throw of the dice. First go the chasseurs of the guard. They hit the British Guards division. At 30 yards, 1,400 British guardsmen stand up from where they've been lying down behind the ridge. Wellington himself gives the order, "Now, Maitland, now's your time." The British Guards fire a devastating volley. The chasseurs stagger. Another volley. The chasseurs begin to fall back. Then the unthinkable happens. The Imperial Guard, who have never retreated, break. They run. "La Garde recule." The Guard is retreating. The cry spreads through the French army. If the Guard can be beaten, all is lost. Units that had been fighting for 8 hours suddenly realize the battle is lost. The retreat begins. At that moment, Zieten's Prussian corps finally arrives on Wellington's left. Fresh troops, 30,000 men who haven't been fighting all day. They smash into Napoleon's flank. The retreat becomes a rout. Napoleon tries to rally the Guard. "Stand fast, reform, one more effort." It's useless. The army is dissolving. His aides grab his horse's bridle and force him to flee. Behind him, 40,000 French casualties litter the field. The Prussians pursue through the night. No mercy, no quarter. They chase the French army for 20 miles. It's not a retreat anymore, it's a manhunt. By dawn, Napoleon's Armée du Nord has ceased to exist as a fighting force. June 19th, morning. Grouchy receives word that Napoleon has been defeated at Waterloo. The French army has been destroyed. The empire is finished. He stares at the message in disbelief. He still has 33,000 men, an intact, undefeated corps. Grouchy conducts a fighting retreat back to France, protecting what's left of the army. He's the last French unit to cross back into France, still in good order. He will spend the rest of his life defending his decisions at Wavre. Those 2 letters, the first one arriving 5 hours late, the second arriving 3.5 hours late. If either had arrived just 2 hours earlier, would Grouchy have marched to Napoleon's aid? Here's what might have happened. If Grouchy had received the first letter at 1 p.m. instead of 3 p.m., he could have marched immediately, 33,000 men arriving at 5 p.m. instead of the estimated 9 p.m., right when Napoleon needed them most. Imagine this. Napoleon is fighting Wellington and the 1st Prussian Corps. Suddenly, French drums are heard to the east, not Prussians, French. Grouchy's 33,000 men appearing in the rear of Blücher's forces. Blücher would face an impossible choice: continue attacking Napoleon while Grouchy destroys his rear, or turn to face Grouchy while Wellington and Napoleon both attack him. Either way, the Prussian offensive stalls. Without full Prussian support, Wellington cannot hold. He's been hanging on by his fingernails all day. Napoleon has fresh troops in the Imperial Guard. Wellington's reserves are gone. His line is cracking. Without Prussian reinforcement, he must retreat or be destroyed. Or consider the second letter scenario. If that letter had arrived at 3 p.m. instead of 5:30 p.m., Grouchy could have disengaged from Wavre, might have reached Waterloo by 7 or 8 p.m., right as the Imperial Guard was making its final assault. The Imperial Guard attacks with 33,000 fresh troops suddenly appearing on the British left. Not 4,000 guardsmen walking into concentrated fire, but a full corps assault coordinated with the Guards' attack on the center. Wellington's line, already stressed to the breaking point, shatters. But this isn't what happened. The letters arrived late. Grouchy stayed at Wavre. Napoleon lost at Waterloo. The question that haunts military historians: why were the letters so delayed? We know who carried the letters. We know when they were sent. We know when they arrived. What we don't know is what happened during those missing hours. The terrain was difficult. The roads were muddy. But 5 hours? 3.5 hours? Some historians argue the couriers were delayed by normal battlefield chaos. Roads clogged with wounded, confusion about which units were where, getting lost in unfamiliar terrain. These things happen in war. Others suggest something more sinister, that one or both couriers were intercepted, that Prussian cavalry, swarming between the French armies, caught and killed them, that new couriers had to be sent, costing precious time. The darkest theory? That someone in Napoleon's staff deliberately delayed the messages. There were men who wanted Napoleon gone, men who feared another 20 years of war, men who thought losing at Waterloo might actually save France. What we know for certain is this: Napoleon wrote explicit orders. Those orders took far longer than expected to reach Grouchy. By the time they arrived, it was too late to matter. And 40,000 men died in a battle that might have had a different outcome. For the rest of his life, Grouchy defended his actions. I followed my orders. I pursued the Prussians as instructed. When I received new orders, it was too late to execute them. The fault lies not with me, but with the system that could not deliver orders in time. Was he right? Technically, yes. He followed his orders. He engaged the enemy where he found them. He conducted a successful fighting retreat after Waterloo. By the letter of military law, he did nothing wrong. But war isn't fought by the letter. It's fought by the spirit. Great commanders improvise. They march toward the sound of guns. They understand the larger situation. They make decisions based on what needs to happen, not just on what they're told to do. Napoleon never forgave him. Grouchy's failure to arrive at Waterloo cost me the battle, the throne, and France herself. He had 33,000 men. He heard the guns. He knew where the battle was, and he did nothing. Grouchy's supporters counter. He was given vague orders to pursue Prussians. He did that. Napoleon's subsequent orders arrived too late. How is that Grouchy's fault? You cannot blame a man for failing to execute orders he doesn't have. And here's the deeper truth. Napoleon's system of command was breaking down. In his earlier campaigns, his army had been smaller, more compact. Orders could be delivered in hours. At Waterloo, his forces were spread over 30 miles. Communication took half a day. Armies were getting bigger. Battlefields were expanding, but communication technology hadn't changed. It was still men on horses carrying written messages. The speed of command was the speed of a galloping horse on a muddy road. 20 years later, the electric telegraph would change everything. Orders could be sent instantaneously over hundreds of miles. But in 1815, Napoleon was still using the same communication methods as Julius Caesar: couriers, signals, messengers. So we're left with the most frustrating question in history. What if? What if the letters had arrived on time? What if Grouchy had marched to the guns without waiting for orders? What if a single courier had ridden faster? If Napoleon had won at Waterloo, European history changes completely. No exile to St. Helena, possibly a negotiated peace giving France defensible borders, or possibly another year of war until Napoleon was finally defeated. We'll never know. What we do know is that Waterloo ended the 100 Days. Napoleon abdicated 4 days later. He was exiled to St. Helena, a remote island in the South Atlantic. He would spend the last 6 years of his life there replaying Waterloo in his mind. On St. Helena, Napoleon talked about Waterloo constantly, refighting it, analyzing what went wrong, writing memoirs that blamed everyone but himself. But even Napoleon admitted, Grouchy's absence was decisive. With him, I would have won. Modern historians are more measured. Waterloo was decided by many factors: Wellington's defensive position, Blucher's determination to support him, the British infantry's steadiness, the failure of the French cavalry charges. Grouchy's absence was important, but it wasn't the only factor. But those letters, those 2 pieces of paper, they haunt the historical record. They represent something we all fear, that huge events can turn on tiny details, that the course of history can change because a man on a horse took a wrong turn in the mud. We want history to be logical. We want great events to have great causes. We want to believe that Waterloo was inevitable, that Napoleon's system was flawed, that Wellington and Blucher were destined to win, because the alternative is terrifying.
The alternative is that history is random, that a courier getting lost can change empires, that a 5-hour delay in communication can decide the fate of nations, that 40,000 men can die because someone took the long way around. We still see this today. Battles where communication failures lead to disaster, where orders arrive too late, where commanders on the ground don't know what their superiors want them to do. Technology has improved, but war is still chaotic. In Afghanistan in 2021, communication breakdowns between civilian and military leadership led to a chaotic evacuation. Not because people were incompetent, because war is confusing, because orders get misunderstood, because the person who needs to make a decision doesn't have the information they need. The fundamental problem hasn't changed since Waterloo. War is too big for one person to control. Information moves too slowly. Local commanders have to make decisions without knowing the bigger picture, and sometimes those decisions are wrong. Clausewitz called it the fog of war, the confusion, the uncertainty, the gap between what commanders want to happen and what actually happens. Napoleon understood this better than anyone, but even Napoleon couldn't overcome it at Waterloo. Grouchy's tragedy is that he was a competent professional soldier caught in an impossible situation. He had vague orders. He was operating independently. He couldn't see the bigger picture. When he finally got clear orders, it was too late. The lesson isn't that Grouchy was incompetent. The lesson is that rigid command structures fail in chaos, that following orders isn't always the right choice, that sometimes the right thing to do is to disobey, improvise, march toward the sound of guns. Marshal Ney did that. He improvised constantly at Waterloo. He made independent decisions. He charged when nobody ordered him to charge, and his improvisation led to disaster. So maybe the lesson is more complicated than we'd like. There are no easy answers. War is complex. Command is difficult. Communication is imperfect. We can judge Grouchy from 200 years away with perfect information. He had to make decisions in real time with imperfect information and muddy roads. And that's the real story of those letters. Not about mail delivery, about human limitations, about how even the best systems fail under pressure, about how history turns on decisions made by tired, confused men who don't know what will happen next. Imagine being those couriers, riding through hostile territory, carrying messages they probably couldn't read, not knowing that empires depended on them arriving on time. Did they know they were late? Did they push harder? Did they take risks? We don't know their names. We don't know what delayed them. They're footnotes in history, unknown soldiers who carried letters that might have changed the world. But they didn't arrive in time, and history went a different way. The letters themselves still exist in French military archives. Historians have studied them. Napoleon's handwriting, the urgent tone, the explicit orders, physical evidence of a plan that never came to fruition because paper travels slower than armies move. The letters are desperate. That's what strikes you when you read them. Napoleon, the master strategist, begging Grouchy to understand the situation, to march toward the guns, to save France. You can feel the urgency, the fear that it's all slipping away. The archive also contains Grouchy's acknowledgement receipts, confirming when he received each letter, the timestamps that show the delay, the evidence of the lag between Napoleon's orders and Grouchy's awareness of them. History preserved in bureaucratic paperwork. There's even a weather report from June 18, 1815, confirming that the roads were muddy, that visibility was poor, that conditions were terrible for fast travel, as if we needed proof that couriers had legitimate reasons to be slow. But the bigger question remains, even if the letters had arrived on time, would Grouchy have obeyed? He was a methodical man, a man who followed procedures, a man who, by his own admission, believed in executing orders as written, not improvising. So maybe the letters don't matter as much as Grouchy's personality. Maybe a different marshal would have marched without orders. Maybe someone like Ney or Murat would have heard the guns and ridden toward them regardless of what their orders said. Maybe Napoleon chose the wrong man for an independent command. Grouchy was excellent at following orders, but Napoleon needed someone who could think independently, who could assess the situation and act without waiting for instructions. So maybe Napoleon's real mistake wasn't the letters. Maybe it was giving Grouchy an independent command in the first place. Maybe the strategic error happened days before Waterloo, when Napoleon divided his army and put Grouchy in charge of a third of it. Or maybe the problem was systemic. Napoleon had trained his marshals to follow his orders. He'd centralized command. He'd made himself the brain of the army. And when the army got too big for one brain to control, the system broke down. The irony is brutal. Napoleon's greatest strength became his fatal weakness. His ability to control armies through personal direction, his insistence on making all key decisions himself. It worked brilliantly when his army was compact. It failed catastrophically when it was spread over 30 miles. He never learned to delegate properly. He never trusted his subordinates to think for themselves. So when they needed to think for themselves at Waterloo, they didn't know how. They waited for orders, and the orders arrived too late. Compare this to Wellington. He gave his subordinates clear objectives and trusted them to achieve those objectives however they saw fit. His command structure was more flexible, more decentralized, more able to adapt when communication broke down. Two philosophies of command. Napoleon's centralized control, detailed orders, personal direction. Wellington's mission command, trusted subordinates, flexibility. At Waterloo, Wellington's approach proved superior, not because Wellington was a better general, because his system was more resilient. Modern militaries have learned this lesson. Mission command is now standard doctrine. You give subordinates an objective and let them figure out how to achieve it. You don't micromanage from headquarters, because when communication fails, they can still function. But we're left with those letters, physical evidence of communication failure at the most critical moment. Reminders that even the best plans can fail due to simple logistics, that paper and ink and horses in mud can decide the fate of empires. For historians, they're endlessly fascinating and deeply frustrating. We know exactly what Napoleon wanted Grouchy to do. We know Grouchy never got the message in time. We can calculate exactly how many hours of delay made the difference. But we can't change it. So the what if persists. What if the courier had taken a different road? What if the letters had arrived 2 hours earlier? What if Grouchy had been a different kind of man? What if Napoleon had never divided his army? The answer we have is the one history gave us. Napoleon lost. Grouchy didn't arrive. The letters were late. and 40,000 men died on a field in Belgium on a rainy June day in 1815. Today, if you visit Waterloo, there's a memorial, a huge lion on a hill, built from French cannons captured during the battle. You can walk the field, see where the Guard attacked, where Wellington's line held, where 40,000 men fell. What's not there is any memorial to those letters, to the couriers who carried them, to the hours lost in transit, to the moment when Napoleon realized Grouchy wasn't coming, to the decision that wasn't made because the information arrived too late. That's the invisible history, the history of things that didn't happen, orders that weren't executed, decisions that weren't made, letters that arrived too late. You can't build monuments to might-have-beens. But they matter. They matter because they remind us that history isn't inevitable, that great events turn on small details, that a letter arriving 5 hours late can change the world, that 40,000 men can die because someone couldn't deliver a message on time. And that's the human truth behind all of this. We want to believe that great causes have great effects, that Waterloo was decided by grand strategy and tactical genius, but it might have been decided by mud on a road and a horse that couldn't gallop fast enough.
We fear this randomness. We want history to make sense. We want to believe that Napoleon lost because his system was flawed, not because a courier got lost, not because a letter took 5 hours instead of 3. But the truth we know is simpler and more terrifying. One letter, delayed by hours, and the course of European history changed. Napoleon exiled, the empire ended, a new world order established, all possibly because a piece of paper didn't arrive on time. Did a single letter change the outcome of the Battle of Waterloo? We'll never know for certain. We can't rerun history. We can't deliver those letters 2 hours earlier and see what happens. All we can do is look at the evidence. And the evidence says Napoleon wrote explicit orders. Those orders arrived too late to be executed. Grouchy stayed at Wavre with 33,000 men while Napoleon lost at Waterloo. And Napoleon himself believed Grouchy's absence was decisive. The honest answer? Maybe. Probably. We think so. But we can't be sure. War has too many variables. Waterloo was decided by 1,000 factors. Grouchy's absence was one of them, an important one, perhaps the decisive one. But we know this. 2 letters were sent. 2 letters arrived late. One marshal never received clear orders in time to act on them, and 40,000 men died in a battle that might, just might, have ended differently if a courier had ridden faster through the mud. 1 letter, 5 hours of delay, the difference between Napoleon remaining emperor or dying in exile, the difference between French hegemony or British dominance, the difference between the 19th century we got and a 19th century we can only imagine, all turning on paper, ink, and the speed of a horse on a muddy road in Belgium in June 1815.
The British infantry, hidden behind the ridge, suddenly stand and deliver devastating volleys at 50 yards. Then the British heavy cavalry, the Household and Union brigades, 2,500 horsemen, charge into the disrupted French columns. It's magnificent and terrible. The British cavalry smash through D'Erlon's corps, capture 2 eagles, sabering gunners, routing infantry. Then they lose control. They charge too far. French lancers counterattack. The British cavalry is cut to pieces. Half of them are killed or captured. 2 p.m. The first Prussian units reach the battlefield. Bülow's 4th Corps, 30,000 men, emerging from the Paris wood to the northeast. Napoleon has to react. He sends Lebeau's 6th Corps and the Young Guard, 10,000 men, to hold them off. Napoleon realizes Grouchy still hasn't appeared. Where is he? Why hasn't he attacked the Prussian rear? He writes a second letter, even more urgent than the first. A second courier gallops off into the afternoon. This letter is desperate. The battle is here, at Waterloo. March toward the sound of the guns immediately. Even if you cannot attack the Prussian rear, your presence on their flank will prevent them from fully committing. We need you. France needs you. March now. But where is Grouchy? He's at Wavre, 15 miles away, still pursuing Prussians who aren't there anymore. At 11 a.m., his officers heard the thunder of Napoleon's guns to the west. That's the main battle, they said. We should march toward it. Grouchy refuses. My orders are to pursue the Prussians. Until I receive new orders, I will continue to pursue the Prussians. He's a man who follows orders. He's a man who does what he's told. He's a man who cannot improvise. 3:30 p.m. at Waterloo. Marshal Ney, frustrated by the stalled infantry attacks, sees what he thinks is a British retreat, infantry units repositioning behind the ridge. He makes a decision, a terrible decision. He orders the cavalry to charge. Unsupported cavalry against unbroken infantry in square formation. Every military manual says this is suicide, but Ney is beyond reason. He's been fighting for 20 years. He's the bravest of the brave. He leads 5,000 horsemen up the slope. The British infantry forms squares, hedgehogs of bayonets that cavalry cannot break. The French cavalry surges around them like water around rocks. British infantry fire volleys into the swirling horsemen at point-blank range. Horses and men go down in heaps.